Welcome back, everybody, to the Pat Flynn Show, joined with Dr. Jim Madden once again. We are going to continue, I guess, our series, somewhat occasional series on philosophical explorations and different themes. And we wanted to talk about, I don't know what the term exactly is for it, Jim, either traditional philosophy or perennial philosophy. If I want to be provocative, I'm just going to call it true philosophy. I think it's all right if we're a little provocative from time to time, and I think that we will. I think that we will probably revisit some of the themes today that link back to the original discussion we did on what is Platonism, and it will probably connect up well with the series we're doing right now in Plato's The Republic. But
one would hope.
Yeah, man. Yeah, one would hope. But before we dive into it, what's happening? What's shaking? What's new?
Not much. I had some mad good training last night in the jiu-jitsu. Then got up this morning and made a terrible decision and stuck with the rather demanding kettlebell program I'm doing right now and did the planned workout. And I'll say this is I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I hope to have some good training tonight.
Yeah, nice. You're going to roll around a little bit?
Yeah, we'll be rolling tonight.
Nice.
I had a pretty good workout yesterday. Had an awesome workout on what day of the week is it? On Sunday.
Yeah.
So yeah, things are going good on the training front. Before we dive into it, man,
and I got a book yesterday on Heidegger that was banned on Amazon, so I'm very excited about sitting down with that over fall break. So
the world we're living in, brother.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to read as many books banned by Amazon as I can right now.
Yeah, man. I mean, to my mind, you probably can't go wrong. I know, like, knowing the books that have been banned, and how good those books are, like Anderson's book, for example.
Right.
Yeah, you probably can't go wrong.
Right.
So, dude, I had to bring it up. I know this
Sure.
is totally off topic, but you missed out by not watching the Fury Wilder fight.
I know, dude. I have, gosh,
I do want to shame you about that.
No.
This was a big one.
When Aristotle says you can only know if one has a happy life from the perspective of the deathbed, right? From a complete life, because it's when you sit back, when your days are coming to an end, you can ask, did that go down? Did that happen by luck, or did that happen through my virtue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you only know it where it comes out. And I think one of the data points on my deathbed, when I assess whether indeed, it was my virtue running this or not, was the dumb decision not to get that fight. and we watched the free UFC instead, right? On Saturday. And we saw like one of our favorites, Mackenzie Dern, get her butt kicked. So it was like, it was a double defeat. Yeah.
Defeat. I rarely, if ever, go in for the pay-per-views, and I don't even follow boxing very closely, but that was like, Christine stayed up and watched it with me, and we both agreed that may have been like the single best sporting event that we've ever seen.
Oh my God.
Fight. Yeah. It was just like everything you want in a good martial arts match is just like such awesome technical precision, tons of tension. Like it could go either way at any point. And sometimes you thought it was going one way and then starts to swing back the other way. So you're just constantly at the edge of your seat. Anyway, off topic, but just had to make sure that you knew the failure that happened.
Yeah, that's right. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, as you know, I am open to my own fallibility, and this is more evidence, right?
As we all should be. All right, so let's dive in. I actually have a brief outline of some of the points I want to explore with you, Jim. I'm really kind of drawing from two.
I've come with something of an outline too, so.
Oh, good. Yeah, perfect. Well, there's kind of two, I guess, main texts that have significantly influenced me and that I return to. You can tell they're very well loved. We have Aristotle and Other Platonists by Lloyd Gerson, and we have Real Essentialism by David Oderberg.
Sure.
Now, actually, let me start with a quote by Oderberg to open this up, and then we'll immediately get your comments and we'll start diving into what we mean by traditional or true philosophy. And in fact, this is what Oderberg calls it. He calls it philosophical traditionalism. So I got like 2 paragraphs here I just want to read through real quick. This is from David Oderberg. He says, contemporary analytical philosophy is marked by several tendencies: empiricism, naturalism, scientism, and reductionism. These lead to various forms of skepticism and anti-realism, for example, about morality, art, religion. Many of those not caught in the grip of these tendencies embrace other schools of thought, such as Kantianism, which bring their own skeptical outlooks, for example, about our capacity to know things as they really are. Nevertheless, there are philosophers who in various ways continue to resist these powerful trends. Such trends, says Oderberg, should indeed be resisted. What I have called philosophical traditionalism provides a way of doing so. Philosophical traditionalism can be seen as both a state of mind and a set of doctrines. With respect to the former, the traditionalist seeks to preserve, develop, and enrich our common Western philosophical heritage, beginning with the Greeks and coming down in various forms to the 19th century, with its high point in the immensely fruitful Middle Ages, a period when there was the greatest concentration of dedicated intellectuals working on the same philosophical problems of any time in European history. With respect to the doctrinal side, the traditionalist seeks to preserve, develop, and enrich that strand of our heritage which has had the greatest allegiance for the longest period of time, what might be called the broadly Aristotelian tradition, as developed through the medieval period, where it was most fruitful in its growth, and even in some respects through Descartes, Leibniz, and other various thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries. Last sentence, Aristotelianism is considered by the traditionalists to provide the soundest bulwark against the corrosive tendencies mentioned above, as well as against the equally corrosive tendencies of postmodernist, existentialist, deconstructionist, and other cultural theoretic schools of philosophy. So I just thought those three paragraphs so well summed up of kind of what I wanted to explore in this conversation. Your thoughts?
No, I mean, I might, wonder whether I want to go and say like the 12th century was the high modern mark, right? But I think overall, I couldn't agree more, right, with what he's saying there. And whether or not one is an Aristotelian or not, I think is immaterial, right? The point though is I don't think you're in the great conversation of the West if you're not speaking at some level in Aristotelianese. Okay, right? It's sort of the lingua franca. And you could say, yeah, Plato founds it, but in Plato, as we're going to see as we go through the Republic, it's going to all end very spooky and unspeakable. Okay, and for good or ill, Aristotle introduces, a terminology and a set, like a canon of issues, right? And he provides a stock set of answers against which one can define their own positions, right? So I think there's something really correct about what Oderberg is doing there, is saying is if whether or not you go in for Aristotelian essentialism or not, I think to say that you are partaking in Western philosophy is to define yourself by that position one way or another, right? And I would say, and I think this is implicit what Oderberg is saying here is, I like that he makes with a critique of analytic philosophy on this, is there's a really good book that I read like midway through grad school by a guy named Stephen Capaldi, called, was it The Enlightenment Project and the Analytic Conversation? Okay. Capaldi's an interesting guy. He thought Hume was a theist too. So he's a very interesting thinker.
I actually have heard that assertion before.
Yeah, no,
it never struck me when I was reading Hume, but
I'm pretty sympathetic to it actually too.
Are you really?
Exactly who's, I mean, theist is a little strong, but maybe we'll do this another time because I don't want to get, right. But anyway, Capaldi,
hold on. There's a good point there, and I'll just say a second, is that like I said, part of what kind of brought me out of naturalism into traditional philosophy is I kind of realized that the options, and I stand by this, I don't think it's theism or atheism. I think it's theism or skepticism.
Yeah.
But skepticism isn't atheism, right?
Yeah,
it's skepticism. So I think Hume was a skeptic. Definitely.
Without going too far, my understanding is that Capaldi's view is like the voice in the dialogue, in the dialogues of natural religion for Hume is not Philo, right? It was Edemia, who's this sort of like fideistic believer. It's like this kind of skeptical believer, right?
Right.
So anyway, but
back to your point.
Capaldi's book said, like what analytic philosophy, the only thing that there is no definition of analytic philosophy for Capaldi, and you can't say there's a certain particular tradition of texts, right? Because the canon is completely open, right? There's no one doctrinal thing to say that analytic philosophy is, right? It's not like Aristotelianism where, we could actually, we're able to do it yet. Like, say, what are the base doctrines there?
We're going to go through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't even say there's a particular method, because if you can say, well, it's just the method of making explicit the logical underpinnings of argument. Well, the medievals did a good bit of that too, right? You can't, if you want to say it's the predicate calculus, good luck, because a lot of analytic philosophers are going to be happy to call the predicate calculus into question as capturing reality. So like Capaldi sees like analytic philosophy as this sort of, a Hegelian snake swallowing its own tail. It's the tradition that claims to have no tradition. And, Capaldi goes pretty far with Wittgenstein and people like that, and I do too, to say if you're not in conversation with the tradition, you're not saying anything. Okay. You cannot create discourse ex nihilo. Okay. Yeah. Right. And so I like it makes sense why Oderberg's doing this.
And notice he didn't give a definition. He said it's marked by certain tendencies.
Yeah, right? It's marked by certain tendencies. And that's what got me thinking about this book I read. It's probably been 15, 20 years since I read that book. And it's very much what Capaldi's doing there. It's funny, I read that book. I'm in the middle of writing a dissertation, or getting ready to propose a dissertation that's basically analytic philosophy. I'm like, oh, crap. But hey, I got to get it done. So just ignore that for 10 years. We'll come back to it. Yeah. Yeah. So I like the quote a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. No. So just, curious for you, Jim, because I mean, your background is analytic philosophy. You did your PhD at Purdue, right? Yeah. Did you have a sort of like major paradigm shift moment throughout your career? I mean, obviously,
I've had a few. Yeah. Yeah.
But say from like the tradition with no tradition, as it were, to traditional philosophy, can you identify like a specific time when, I don't know, the ground sort of dissolved beneath your feet?
It was reading McIntyre.
He'll do that to people.
Yeah. At the tail end of grad school. It was like spring of 2002. I was writing my dissertation. Had to get that thing done on the quick because Will was on his way. Right, Jen was pregnant with our first, and basically my first job said, you'll show up with your dissertation in hand, or you won't show up. So it's like, get the thing done. And so I was just hammering away on this dissertation, and then on the side, I was reading McIntyre's 3 rival versions of moral inquiry. And I came away from that book like, what the hell am I doing? Right. And it was about that time I had been reading Capaldi and people like that. Yeah. So it was McIntyre.
That's cool. Yeah. McIntyre came later for me, but I can see like if he was one of the initial guys I ran into, I probably would have had a similar experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
All right. So let's go through. I put this little thing of notes together very quickly.
Sure.
So
I'm starting to get a chance to look at that.
No, we'll call it tentative. Call it tentative, where I'm trying to kind of lay out, I think, some of the core commitments or doctrines, if you want to call it, of what's associated with traditional or perennial philosophy. So we'll get them out and then we'll comment and we'll have some fun. And gentle listeners, if you have any questions, either on this topic or anything in general, let us know. See some familiar faces in the comments. What up to our friend John Appleseed here? What's up, Brendan? Good to see you guys there. So, all right, let's start with this one.
I love the Heidegger's hate speech.
Yeah.
Well played. Well played, friend. Well played.
All right. So I think one of the first things that I want to, the kind of first aspect I want to highlight is the commitment to philosophy as a discipline, right? That it has a distinct and very important role to play, distinct as from scientific inquiry, right? And it can arrive at truths, right? Either with certainty or strong probability. And importantly, the truths philosophy arrives at, I would want to claim, I think this is in his tradition as well, are in many respects distinctly philosophical truths, right? They're truths that in principle cannot really be gotten at by the scientific method. So we think more about moral truths, about the nature and kinds of knowledge and this or that. And do you want me just to storm through these, or do you want to take one by one, Jim? All right, so that's the first one, that philosophy has a distinct and important role to play, and it can get at truth. Doesn't mean it's easy, but we can get at truth, and it gets at distinctly philosophical truths. When it comes to metaphysics, I want to say that in the tradition, we have a broad commitment to realism. We maintain that there is a world independent of our minds. We can talk about theological idealism, maybe if we want, but for the most part, we're committed to a world independent of our minds. We discover rather than invent the world, and the world is suffused with essences and aims, right? The teleology, substances, that's all there, right? So there's and also I would say a broad commitment to something like the correspondence theory of truth is part of that package as well. And I say broad commitment because there's debate of how of whether Aquinas was really in that camp or not. Haldane wants to make some subtle distinctions there. So broad, keep the term broad in mind. With respect to knowledge, I want to say that perennial philosophy says that this often consists in the inner grasp of reality by means of forms. Knowledge is not only possible, though again not necessarily easy, but is in many respects transcendent. It's not bound by language or culture or stuff like that, right? So I think a way to understand a lot of this is sort of by like what it's not, right? So it's not relativistic in other ways, right? Logic, commitment to traditional syllogistic logic rather than Fregean predicate system is a primary tool for arriving at truth. It's an aid of human reason, an instrument of it, so that's important. And then just a smattering of other thoughts. It's non-reductionist, especially with the human person, right? It's going to take a broadly kind of like hylomorphic perspective. The moral knowledge is a real possibility. Same with transcendent moral principles, general principles of morality based broadly on natural law. Metaphysical truths constraining, I think this is important, right? Metaphysical truths constraining possible scientific theories, right? So I think that the posture that the philosophical traditionalist is going to take is they will reject certain scientific theories if it seems incompatible with broad metaphysical truths, right? And the ability to reason from facts about the world to the existence of a fundamental first principle, and most in the tradition are going to see that to be God. So Jim, I just dumped a whole bunch of stuff out there, man. Pick it up wherever you want. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would buy all those, right?
That's fine. Let's get into it. Yeah.
Just if you, because I think it would, I think some of that stuff would beg the question against people that are clearly a part of the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Like for instance, have you excluded Occam as a philosopher now?
Have I excluded him from being in the traditionalist philosophy? Because I would not want to say I've excluded him as a philosopher.
Yeah.
And let me be clear: has Pat Flynn excluded him, or has Lloyd Gerson and David Oderberg excluded him? Because I'm just pulling this from those guys, right? Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or
this is not original. Pat Flynn didn't come up with this.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or like the claim that knowledge is always translatable, right, from one language to another, something like that, right? I think there's legitimate worries to be had about that, right? And I think you're gonna, once again, I think you're going, not you, but like the promulgator of the list, right?
Right.
Well, you're gonna like end up knocking Wittgenstein out of there, or even to some sense, like someone who's really an arch realist of a very odd kind, like Hegel, right?
Right. So right there, I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good point to push back on, right? Because maybe we can draw a distinction out here, right? Is it going to be translatable? I want to say, due to natural limitations of certain systems of language, probably not, right?
Right.
But is truth bound by language or culture? There, I want to say no, right?
Yeah, I guess what's bound mean then?
Just a difference by it, right? Where it's just So no, I see your point about.
I guess I'd have to know what bound means there, because I mean, if it means there's some non-linguistic access to it, I'll actually, like with people like Merleau-Ponty, I'll go pretty far away with that. But then we're not talking about something that can ever be made explicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
In like some kind of propositional form too. Then, do you see what I mean? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, this could open up a whole bag of worms, right? Because I think we both would be committed to knowledge like being coming in many different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what might be the case for human knowledge might not be the case of knowledge as such.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Right.
Cool.
But I think an important thing is not to fall into a false dichotomy there. And this is something like what a lot of the a lot of people I think, knowingly misread people like Wittgenstein on is to say that knowing for us will always be knowing for us, right? Meaning for some us, it'll be bound to some linguistic, you know, context. Okay. In no way does it mean there isn't a real world, right? It's just saying that our access points to it may be incommensurable, but it doesn't mean there isn't a real world that we're accessing, right? And coming at. Does that make sense?
That's how I'm understanding this.
Right. And I think a lot of times what happens though is a lot of the so-called adversaries of the perennial philosophy are read uncharitably to be made adversaries by advocates of the perennial philosophy. You see what I mean? Right. And I think there's some of this stuff, there's less disagreement than is made out, right? Or the disagreements are less important than are made out. Right.
Good. Yeah, continue.
Sure. Okay. The thing I find most interesting about the list, okay, is so you have a commitment to realism, okay, and it's interesting. Built in the list, into that commitment, realism said many ways right there. There's realism as said in the sense of there's a mind independent world, okay, and then there's realism in the sense that there's something like essentialism, like there are actual, well, first of all, there's realism in the sense of there are universal truths, right? Okay, so it's realism as anti-idealism, and I'd say idealism with a small I, like in the Berkeleyan sense. Okay,
yeah, right.
And then there's realism in the sense of anti-nominalism, right? Okay, and then there's it seems like there's realism in the sense of an affirmation of essentialism. Okay, and it's interesting, like those are three different claims. Okay, but and then as another line in it, we get there's a claim there is knowledge. Okay, that there is is in a sense translatable knowledge. Okay. I think it's important to understand for Aristotle, at least, those are all a package. Like you cannot affirm one of those, right, without entailing all the other ones, right? Okay, and I think that's a very, very, very important point for understanding, at least what the Aristotelian tradition is. I think that's kind of the root, the absolute like cornerstone of the Aristotelian tradition, and maybe Plato too. Like it'd be interesting to tease that out. Yeah. And so I think for Aristotle, there can't be reference to discrete individuals, right, unless those individuals fall into kinds, right, and those kinds have to like be essential kinds, not merely accidental kinds, right? And if that's the case, then by Aristotle's definition of knowledge, they're all knowable too. Okay.
Yes. Right.
So for Aristotle, there isn't reference unless there's like an implicit background knowledge of the thing in terms of its essential kind. I think that's very, very important. Okay. So like for Aristotle, if you lose essentialism, you've lost the realism about an extramental reality. Do you see me? Okay. Yeah. That's very important. I think people miss that. Yeah.
And my suspicion is at least Oderberg's probably going to be in strong agreement with that, right?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm sure Oderberg. Yeah.
But that's a good point, right? This is sort of a package deal, right?
It's a package deal.
You either got them all or you got none of them, right?
And what's interesting for Aristotle on this is this all follows from a commitment to the principle of non-contradiction. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. So what does he say? That's the first principle of being. And so you really say, like, you could summarize the whole thing. It's like, it's a commitment that there is being, that there's a fact of the matter about being. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Hold on. John Appleseed says this is going over my head. I need to do some reading. Well, let us help you, because this is philosophy for the people. So we can slow it down and take time to explain some of these things. So, we're just using a lot of, I guess, in-house terms like essentialism. What do we mean by that, Jim? When we say essentialism, what is that commitment?
Okay, so, well, actually, can we maybe proceed it differently?
Yeah, enter wherever you want. Yeah.
Okay, so let me actually. Can I just do it the way Aristotle does it? Is that,
follow the master, my man.
Follow the master. Right? Yeah. Okay, so Aristotle says that the principle of non-contradiction, which is the claim that nothing both is and is not, right, in the same way, in the same sense, at the same time.
Yeah, under the same aspect, right?
Under the same aspect is the absolute first principle of knowledge and being, and remember for Aristotle, knowledge and being are basically the same thing. Okay.
Right. And this is this. I just want to emphasize this, right? This is critical because for Aristotle, I think this is right. It's not just a principle of knowing. So it's not just a logical principle. It's an ontological. Ontological principle. Right?
But and this is much bigger fish, but you can see this explains a lot of what I'm up to, which would then mean the idea that there's something different between like the mental and the non-mental, right, is already called into question by this, right? Like being and knowing are the same in a way, right? But anyway, that's an aside. So he says you've got this principle of non-contradiction, and he says that you cannot get inquiry off the ground unless we affirm this, okay? And he actually says in the Metaphysics, if you attempt to prove the principle of non-contradiction, it just shows you're uneducated. So he's basically saying if you try to prove the principle of non-contradiction, you need to go back to the trailer, right? Okay. And so
it's true.
It's true. Yeah. Okay. Because why? Because he says, well, it's a first principle, and by definition, first principles can't be proven because they're first, right? There's no deeper principle by which I could prove the principle of non-contradiction. So any proof I would give of it, right, derive it from some prior premise, would presuppose that we already had the principle of non-contradiction in play. So it's sort of an implicit premise in every syllogism or something like that.
Right. And so if people are going to try and defend it, it has to be an indirect defense by way of retorsion or stuff like that, right? And
Okay. And so he says, look, I cannot prove it in this kind of foundationalist way, right? But he then says, we can give an indirect proof of it. Okay. In which case, in logic, that usually means to show that you deny it entails a contradiction, and therefore the denial is false, right? But you can't do that here. You can't mean that, because that would presuppose the principle of non-contradiction. Do you see that, right? And a lot of people think this is what he's up to. Is like if you say the principle of non-contradiction is false, then you're going to say something both is and isn't. That's a contradiction. Therefore, that's false, right? But that's a bad argument, right? Because it presupposes that there aren't contradictions. Okay. What he actually does in the Metaphysics, and I think this is going to explain so much for the perennial philosophy, as he says, he's going to say, in order for us to say something significant, right, we have to have the principle of non-contradiction. We have to affirm the principle of non-contradiction implicitly. Okay. And so he makes a distinction between making a statement and saying something significant, signifying something and stating something. So he's basically saying you can make whatever grammatically, linked utterances you want. You can make any noise you want. Okay. But there's a difference between just saying and saying something that is either true or false, saying something that we can like evaluate as either true or false. Okay. So there's a difference between just, my reading words I don't understand and my understanding the words. Because if I understand them now, I'm actually seeing them as somehow making a claim on the world. Okay. Okay. So like right now you're basically saying like we're kind of moving towards a realism here, right? Like by distinguishing between statement and signification. Okay. And then he says, in order for there to be signification, we have to signify, he calls it one thing. Okay. There has to be a one thing we signify. Okay. And the way he glosses that immediately is to say, well, when I signify man, I have to mean, and just as example he uses, hairless biped. Okay. And I have to mean the same thing by man, namely hairless biped, every time I use it. Okay. Because I think what he's up to there is he's saying, look, unless you have a concept behind what you're saying, it doesn't commit you to anything. Right. It's only because my saying it commits me. Okay. I'm saying that thing. Which thing am I talking about? The hairless biped. Right. I'm only actually making a claim if I'm committed to the hairless biped behaving or not, like sort of being the same thing under many conditions. So it assumes that there's a universal in the background. You get what he's up to there. Okay. So already, if we're going to have significant thought, bang, Aristotle would say you got to be a realist about universals. Do you see that? Okay. Otherwise, there's not one thing I'm saying. I'm saying many things. Because unless there's a universal, I can equivocate with every utterance, right? And therefore, I'm not really making any sense. The words don't have an abiding meaning, so therefore, I'm not signifying anything. Okay. So you see that. So like step one, if we're actually meaning something by our words, they have to commit us to a univocal utterance of some sort. Okay. And then he says, okay, well, is that universal accidental or is it essential? This is going back to the original question. All right. And what he means there is it something like the universal of, say, being an animal, or is it something more like being something sitting, right? Or being something running, or being something that's blue? So is it just merely a variable attribute of the thing, or is it something that marks it as what it is in its essence? Okay.
Right. That if it wasn't there, then it just wouldn't be that thing anymore. Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so what Aristotle says is, no, it actually has to be essential, right? Because if it's not essential, right, once again, it's variable and it doesn't commit you to a univocal utterance, right? Okay. You see what I mean? So otherwise, yeah, it's sitting now, but I couldn't refer to it with my next statement because it might not be sitting. Okay. I have to refer based on some attribute that is like remains in place for that thing. Otherwise, nothing really fixes my reference. Okay. So you can see where he's going here to say, for me to even say that over there, right, even to have ostension, it presupposes universals and it presupposes essentialism, right? Okay. There has to be some essential nature of things in order for me to even get reference off the ground. Okay. And then he says, look, so if you deny the principle of non-contradiction, you're saying, like he says, is like, if you don't think the principle of non-contradiction is true, then you think all attributes are accidental, right? Because if Pat could be a mammal and not a mammal at the same time, then Pat is not essentially a mammal, right? Okay, so then he would say, if you deny the principle of non-contradiction, there are no essential attributes, therefore there's no essences, therefore there's no one, therefore there's no reference, and we can't make any sense at all. Do you see that?
But we can make sense.
But we can make sense. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when I figured out this is what he was doing, this was like you want to talk about like a ground changing moment. I was like, whoa, it's big. It's big. And I'm not explaining it well, right? But,
I think actually you are explaining it quite well.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to go back and listen to that again.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah. And so for Aristotle, he would say, inasmuch as your utterance makes sense, you are committed to there being something distinct from the utterance that it signifies. That thing must be characterizable universally, right? Okay. So you've got like real world realism, you've got universals realism, but that universal must be an essential, right? And so now you've got essentialism realism, all built into the fact that we're making utterances.
Yeah.
And he just thinks it's impossible to actually to claim that, you know, to signify that I'm not signifying.
Right. Yeah. It's not something you can have real doubt about. Only nominal doubt.
Yeah. Only nominal doubt about that. Yeah. Exactly. You can make the statement I'm not signifying, but even that, does the statement I'm not signifying, does it signify? Well, yes, it does. Right. Okay. So you can see there is, I think for Aristotle, like that there is an extramental world, that there are universals and that there are essences are all a complete package, and they are beyond any coherent doubt.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and hence why they are first principle. So just real quick to reiterate for the people who are, because I know there's many different experience levels. First principles we mean principle of non-contradiction. Nothing can both be and not be under the same aspect. Positively stated, that translates to the principle of identity. A is A and not A. Then we have the principle of excluded middle, either A or not A, not neither, not both, right? And when it comes to the principle of contradiction, the point that Jim just kind of threw out there very quickly, but I think is huge, right? Is that it is not just a logical principle, but an ontological one. To the extent that something exists, it is logical, right?
Yep.
That's really kind of the heart of this, right? Because to be is always to be in some way. And in a sense, to assert a contradiction is ultimately to say that something is not what it is. And it's just really a denial of being, I think, is one way to sort of think about it as well.
And so that's really, if you wanted me to define the perennial tradition, okay, it would be that. It's that being makes sense, right? That the structure of thought, like so
it's intelligible, right? Yeah, that's Lonergan.
Parmenides, I think, founds this tradition when he says thought and being are the same thing. Okay, he actually, and now he doesn't mean by that, because we hear that now because we've like, you know, we're like, we're so Cartesian, whether we like it or not, we think of this as like Berkeley, right? Okay. but what that's not what Parmenides means there. He means that like the structure, like the logical structure of thought is the ontological structure of reality. And the ontological structure of reality is the logical structure of thought. Okay, so there isn't a question of the conformity of thought to thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they are one and the same structure, right? Okay, and you can find, Hegel is affirming that, right? Okay, Kant is affirming that, right? The medievals, the medieval realists are affirming that, and I think even some of even the nominalists in a different way are affirming that. Going back into the classical view, like they're all affirming that. They're just trying to figure it out. Okay, and like what do you have with Nietzsche? You have the first person to really say, "I'm not buying it." I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the structure of thought is the structure of reality. The structure of reality is the structure of thought, right? And remember, like we've talked about this before, Nietzsche even says, if there's grammar, there's God, man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning if there's a grammar that gets the world, then you're a theist, right? Okay, whether you like it or not. And even like the phenomenologists in the 20th century, they're trying to deal, like they're trying to cope with whether or not, in fact, we've lost touch with the logical structure of reality, or was it right? Was Parmenides right in the first place? But they're still defining themselves by that question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hate to be overly simplistic, but I
Yeah.
mean it's kind of like 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 the two options for me I said were either theism or skepticism. It's kind of like Aristotle or Nietzsche. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
This
who
has
do you
been said before, right? This is
right?
McIntyre. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. I'm again Pat Flynn, not being totally original here.
No.
But
And
it's something
I
that I
agree.
personally lived through, right? Because remember, I came in through these
Yeah.
sort of crusty old atheists and existentialists, and it kept seeming to reduce to the absurd to me. And
Yep.
then eventually, by seeing that, essentially kind of coming to recognize what Aristotle's getting at is like, it's inescapable, it's undeniable,
Yeah.
undeniable at the end of the day, right? That truth, that the intellect is always poised towards truth. Being really is intelligible.
Yeah.
So I got to just sack up and find and search out the ultimate conditions of what of why that is. And I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think that does commit you to theism in a broad sense at the end
Yeah.
of the day, right? Mm-hmm.
And so two things, right? And these are, I think, two of the biggest problems. Well, not I'm take that back, but the first one is a big problem, I think, for guys like you and me who came up like more or less through analytic philosophy. Okay,
Yeah.
and I think in general, people who coming at this through apologetics. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we let like Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume set the table for us. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so hard to shake it. It is so hard to shake it. It's that we think in terms of those questions, and then we want to look back and see all the prior philosophers and giving like a different kind of answer to those
That's right,
questions.
because an
Right,
image holds us captive.
image holds us captive. Exactly, Wittgenstein's like great line there. Right, we are
Mm-hmm.
held captive by this image. But one of the things that became, you want to talk about like big turning points, right? One of the things that became very, very clear to me in like the last 5-6 years is that image has to be gotten rid of. That is not the image that you're getting from Parmenides to Plato to Aristotle, right, into the medievals. All right,
Mm-hmm.
they thought in being are one for these people. Okay, that it like Descartes begins with the denial of that,
Mm-hmm.
right, the flat denial of that. No, okay, so I think if we're really going to get perennial philosophy, if we're going to do it, like it's hermeneutically very difficult for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to start over. Like we got to start over and like reread and like phenomenologically bracket as best we can all these like this baggage that we inherit from our modernity, right? And but the thing is, to say we don't have that baggage is to say it's just disingenuous, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And how long it does take. I mean, I'm still
Yeah.
shedding. I'm still shedding so much of it.
I am too.
Right. Yeah.
And like the extent I've gone, like in terms of like pissing people off and stuff, right? To like try to shed this baggage, but I'll still find myself like at the end of the day, like haunted by Berkeley, right?
I'm
Yeah.
still being a Cartesian. What's
I'm
wrong
still
with
being,
me? Yeah.
yeah. What's wrong with me? Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing and this is I want to say to the gentle listeners here, those of you who are novices in philosophy, don't take the bait, man. Don't take the bait, right? There's a Heidegger gave a series of lectures to undergraduates that became published as what is called thinking. And at one point, and at the end, it's very interesting. At the end of it, he's taking questions from the audience, right? You can tell he's preparing answers to questions like the students have submitted, right? And he tells them after giving them this lecture on Nietzsche that they should go back and read Aristotle for 15 years before they do this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that,
and
I mean,
here's like,
that was Mortimer Adler's advice, who was
Yeah.
one of those significant guys for helping me with
Yeah.
that paradigm shift, right? He said, I'll never forget, I always bring it up. It's such kind of a lame anecdote, but it always stuck with me. He said, you have to read Aristotle's Ethics 12 times. He just, for whatever reason, he said 12 times,
Yeah.
right?
Good
And it can't
memory.
all be in the same year, right? It's got to be
Right,
over kind of
right.
the course of many years, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's right. That was, I don't, maybe 13 times, I don't know, but at least 12, right?
And I came to a conclusion, like kind of mid-career as a professional philosopher, that I had not really spent my 15 years in this stuff. Right. You know, okay. And okay, so another thing, just using Heidegger as an example, though. Okay, so one, you know, I think we have to like really go back and like take the perennial tradition seriously on its own terms, not for the apologetic value it gives us for scoring points against Hume. Right. Okay. Like they take it on its own terms, like leave the apologetic stuff aside, leave how you're going to make this work on like Facebook, you know, and arguing with your friends or whatever. Right. And just try to get these people on their terms. Right. Really recommend CDC Reeves stuff for all that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, but you know, there's this question. This is kind of the Heideggerian question. Is like, you know, on Heidegger's view, like there is like the tradition began with something distinctive at Parmenides, and it ends in Nietzsche. And Heidegger looks at like, okay, that didn't go well, right? And in his view, and it is the Nietzschean thing was like inevitable. Like as soon as you made the Parmenidean turn, it was going to end in Nietzsche. It was going to be it was going to be a fun ride, but it ends in Nietzsche. Okay, so so this is where I'm going to kind of like say like a pushback on the perennial philosophy, and the very perennial philosophy that I adhere to, right, is those of us who are in that tradition, like we like to complain about how modernity has gone wrong, right? Okay. But this is like the Heideggerian point. It's like, well, look, if the perennial philosophy was so darn good, why did the history of the West go so very wrong? Right. And is the end, is this bad place we're in, was that baked in the cake from the beginning or not? Right. And I think that's the big question. That is like the really big question. Right. And you know, whatever we think about like Heidegger's answer to this, I think what needs to be answered. Like, could this have been avoided given the very beginnings of it? But you can't answer that question until you start at the beginning and follow it through.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I really like the way that you've taken this conversation, Jim. Were there any other aspects of
no, and I don't mean to attack the framework or anything.
No, this is brilliant. And again, always good to follow the master. Are there any other aspects that you wanted to highlight? And we can revisit these themes any other time.
No,
but
no, I'm good, man. I'm good. No, and these, I mean, look, anytime you and I open our mouths, we're talking about these things, right? Yeah.
Right. All right. Let's see if anybody's got any questions here. I hope if there's anything we can clarify, guys, just let us know. JC Beats has a question. He wants to know, what are the best books on epistemology and philosophy of mind? All right, Jim, I'll let you go first. And then
I assume JC means epistemology books, and then on the other side, philosophy of mind books, not books that are doing this, but not both.
That's what I take it to be. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think, philosophy of mind, there is Mind, Matter, and Nature available at Amazon, my book. Okay.
A very fine volume.
And I do think it is a very good, it still stands as a very good introduction to philosophy of mind. So I would be remiss not to recommend my own text on that. And I do think Philip Goff, Goff's Galileo's Error is a very good introduction to contemporary philosophy of mind also, right? So and he like my book, he's got an opinion, he's ultimately developing a panpsychist position, which I think is a very interesting position. It's a very easy book too. So I think Mind, Matter, and Nature, my book, or Goff's are my two favorite intro to philosophy of mind, right? Epistemology, that's an interesting question. I'll punt that to you, right?
I mean, there's a lot I like on epistemology. It's in fact, I have one right here. I think this is a good, underrated, underappreciated book. It's called The Philosophy of Knowledge by Kenneth Gallagher. He was up at Fordham.
Okay.
And I recommend this. I had this. This is one of those books that was assigned to me in my master's program that I actually got a lot out of. So in fact, if I were to teach an epistemology course, I would probably just assign this book. Good, history, tracing the history of different epistemological thought. This is definitely perennial philosophy type epistemology there. If you want a modern book, I'll just do a modern series. I mean, I think Plantinga's series are very important. I think he is a significant contributor to epistemology. So, I mean, start with warrant and proper function.
Yeah.
In fact, I think you could just get warrant and proper function and get the kind of
Yeah.
synopsis of Plantinga's account.
Or even more synoptic is he had that fairly recent short book called Knowledge and Christian Belief. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
very good introduction to Plantinga's approach to epistemology and philosophy of religion.
Right. So if you want the kind of externalist theories, Plantinga's great,
and you should.
And you should, yeah, no, yeah. Jim and I are on the same page there. Yeah. If you want internalists, right? If you want a good counterpoint, get Timothy McGrew's book.
Okay.
I think he's probably given the best, most robust contemporary defense of just classic foundationalism.
Sure.
So if you just, it's always good to just be aware of the alternative schools. But yeah, so that's what I'd recommend there. And then Jim gave the philosophy of mind. So we're gonna sell some of Jim's books here. So go buy that one.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. When's your newest one coming out, Jim? Do we have any news on this yet?
I heard back from the editor, and he assures me he's going to publish it. So it's accepted. Awesome. But this gentleman edits series for a number of fairly big houses. So I don't know which publishing house it'll come out from, but I've been assured we're in. So
and give us a sneak peek again. What is the primary thesis of that book?
The primary thesis of the book is to question the basic Cartesian assumptions of philosophy of mind, right? And to link the philosophy of mind to broader questions about the meaning of life. Okay, so the title of the book is Thinking About Thinking, Mind and Meaning in the Era of Technological Nihilism. Okay. I begin the book by discussing, like, it's a curious thing that the two most prominent philosophers of the 20th century, Wittgenstein and Heidegger, despite their vast differences, both thought their primary works would not be understood very well because people had lost touch with what it meant to think at all. Okay. And so that's the impetus for the book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm pumped, man. I can't wait. There was one other thing I was going to say to our friend JC. Oh, if you want a good essay on epistemology, I think is underappreciated. I'm going to pimp my man, Father Norris Clark, again in his book Explorations in Metaphysics. He's got an essay on relational realism, and I think it's brilliant. And he shows what the sort of starting point is, which is interpersonal dialogue as the launch pad for the greater metaphysical project. And I think that fits really well with some of the other, I guess, epistemological positions Jim and I would take. Nice. So it's a short essay. It won't take you long to read it, but it's very insightful. Mm-hmm.
And also now that I've got some other stuff I'm clearing off my plate, like this book, I think what's going to happen is I'm going to just start writing an intro to philosophy of mind anew and release it to the website and Substack. Right?
Oh, nice. Yeah, that'd be sweet.
Yeah, and it'll basically be kind of like, but starting it with this sort of mind, knowledge, being, identity that you find in the Greeks, and like tracking that through. Yeah,
that'd be great. That we could do a series on the podcast
because you think of like the way we generally start, and I did it too, is like the way we start philosophy of mind books. Like, well, here's Descartes, right? We begin like we introduce the Cartesian position. So then we can say, well, that's really wrong, and then like take it back. But what did you do? You began by initiating people into the study with what you're trying to deconstruct, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. Brendan says, what's the elevator speech to get someone to consider Aquinas's Platonic worldview? Let me ask a clarifying question here. Do you mean what's the elevator pitch to try and persuade somebody within the intertomistic debates that Aquinas is actually like Neoplatonic as much as he is Aristotelian? Or is it what's the elevator pitch to get people interested in like Thomism generally, if they're say stuck in some of these trends that Oderberg pointed out? Because those, to my mind, those are two very distinct questions, right?
Yeah.
If it's the latter, let me say this. I mean, I think it just I mean, like, I believe there's a human nature. We have inherent tendencies, and if you just flag some of these, it's going to be attractive. Like, hey, do you think that there's such a thing as truth and that we can know it, right? Do you think that there are general moral principles that transcend culture and stuff like that, and that we can grasp these principles, right? Do you think that the human being is more than just a collection of fermions and bosons or whatever, right? And I think most people are going to say, Yeah, I kind of do. Maybe I'm not convinced of it. Then I'll say, well, look, there is a philosophical school that is greatly compatible with all of contemporary science. In fact, I think makes better sense of contemporary science and can say yes to things that we intuitively think we should be saying yes to, right? It helps to explain these aspects of experience and doesn't explain them away. And I say that kind of from a very personal note, right? It's like that was what was very attractive to me. I was caught in a position for a long time philosophically where there was always this tension, right? Of like things that just and on basic intuitions you think are so real and so undeniable. Morality is a good example, right? But my philosophical worldview couldn't really accommodate them except for trying to explain them away, right? I was never comfortable with that. So once it kind of came on the scene that there was another way of thinking about these things that could make sense of that data without having to explain it away, that was just inherently attractive to me. Didn't convince me immediately, but at least wanted me to give it a serious look, if you know what I mean. Jim, your thoughts?
So, I know Brendan doesn't mean literally an elevator, okay, right? But just in general, I wouldn't talk about this in the elevator, right? I mean, it seems like you're looking like how do I use Thomism in the culture war, right? And I wouldn't do that. It's not made to do that. Like the perennial philosophy is not designed, quote unquote, to like score points in the contemporary American postmodern culture war, right? And I think the degree that we use it that way, we end up distorting it, right? And we end up missing it, right? How do I score points in the culture war is I introduce people to my children, right? I bring them, I treat them humanely, and I let them see my life and what a happy life I'm having. Do you know what I mean? And then maybe we can talk about Thomism like 5 years later, right? Do you know what I mean? I just this is something I'm pretty passionate about. Is I don't think we should see like Aristotle and Aquinas as, you know, implements in like our political struggles, because they're not. It will inevitably force us to conform them to what we want politically, not our politics to them.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, and I'm in full agreement.
I know you are totally. Yeah.
I do philosophy because I want to know what the case is, right? It's always sounds bad when I put it like this, but it's always been very selfish, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't like try and find a philosopher who will support my political positions and help me make better arguments for them. In fact, my political positions changed radically in my philosophical pursuits, right? I was once very liberal, then became like hardcore libertarian, and now as I feel like I've gotten a lot of things straight metaphysically and morally, I actually have far more questions in political philosophy now than I have answers.
Yep, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So yeah, no, you do it for yourself because you want to know what's true.
And I mean, and just use, like what, using Aristotle as example, or even Aquinas, right? What percentage of the population do these guys think would be doing philosophy? I tell you, for Aristotle, you're talking 1%ers. Right.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And even Aquinas, if you go into Summa Contra Gentiles, you know, in the section on faith and reason there, he says, you know, most people aren't smart enough, don't have time or inclination to do this. And that's why we have a Bible.
That's why we have Revelation.
That's why we have Revelation, right? And that's why we have like, you know, good comic books, right? I mean, you're not to put those in
cartoons, right? Yeah.
Cartoons. Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is, you know, are the problems that we're having, just say in higher ed, is it because things have gone like is it simply because we're trying to like expose a much broader swath of the population to kinds of ideas and things that no one would have ever thought to have done that before until we got this idea that somehow to be middle class you have to have a bachelor's degree, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a similar thing here. It's like just because like inevitably what's going to happen is you have to dumb down the ideas, right? Okay. And that comes at expense to the ideas. It doesn't come to the benefit of the people they're being dumbed down for. And say the same thing with the culture war stuff. Is in as much we're trying to popularize this stuff so we can weaponize it in the culture war, it's not like you're going to bring the culture up by doing that. You're going to bring down the ideas that you're trying to preserve. Right.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to end on.
Make one more quick point. Yeah. So I think that our job as academics, right, is not to spread you know, the information first and foremost. It's to preserve it first and foremost, and then ask who should get it. Right. Like I see my job as a professor is not to propagate Western civilization, it's to first and foremost protect it, right, from being diluted, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You see what I mean? And in as much as like, I think like a lot of what's going on is people have just been for not for bad reasons, but have just tended to move to dilution to the point, right, that they've lost like the emphasis on preservation. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why we have philosophy for the people.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
So,
undiluted. Yeah.
Yes. So help us out, gentle listeners. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, leave reviews on iTunes, and we'll catch you in the next episode, guys. Fare thee
Cool.
well.